Welcome. It's 10 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Charrington. I am the Executive Director of Eastside Pathways, which is really a community partnership, and that partnership is staffed, if you will, by a backbone. And our role, and that's what I'm a part of, is the backbone, and our role on the backbone is to convene and facilitate and bring together data and communication. And so we are really shifting our work to help bring that realization to our community so that we actually can be a better community to ensure that we're serving all those that are in need, especially during this crisis time period. So welcome. I invite you to please, if you haven't already, open up your chat and include your name, the community or organization with which you're affiliated, and your contact information. That's important so that we can continue to build relationships with one another, both in this call and outside of these calls. That's really important. And we want to provide that vehicle of a roster. So we'll include your contact information on the roster. If for some reason you do not want to have your contact information included on that and you want to opt out, please feel free to private message Joe Trotty, who is on our team. And Joe is our communications manager. And Joe, if you'll give us a wave there so folks know who you are, that would be great. And speaking of our team, let me go ahead and introduce the rest of our team on our backbone here. Facilitating today is Kalika Curry, who is one of our community impact managers. Also, one of our community impact managers is Sandy Nathan. Sandy, give us a wave. Thanks, Sandy. We also have our data officer, Peyton Richardson, and running things behind the scenes is Vicki Yu. Vicki is our business and operations manager. Thanks, Vicki, for that wave. Just so you know, Vicki's also so on top of things that we do a lot of breakout sessions here in many of our calls. And if for some reason you get stuck in a breakout room that you don't want to be or need to be in a different space, breakout room, if you're in the main room, Vicki will be on tap to help you get into the right location. So a few logistics for today. I'm going to go through these very briefly because I think most of us have been on a lot of Zoom or team calls, but this is Zoom in particular. One thing I want to mention, if you can please, we invite folks to unmute and share verbally. That's really important to have this be interactive as we're learning together, learning in public. And when you unmute, I invite you to please say your name first and then share your thought. This is especially important for those who might be joining on the phone because they're not able to see the video. If you can, please share your video. It's great to connect with people face to face since we're in shelter in place and don't have an opportunity to do that as much. For those on the phone, *6 is what you need to press in order to unmute. And all of this meeting will be recorded, as will the breakout groups that we go into later on. So you'll be able to have access to all of this information via the links that will be provided in communication that will come out by the end of the day. All right, Joe, if we can change the slide to the meeting series purpose, that would be great. One more. Thank you. So for those who have been with us, you know that we're entering into what we're calling phase 3, which is our focus on developing and strengthening our community and community engagement practices, and really ensuring that we're focusing on populations who have traditionally been missed in the past. Last week, we had the opportunity to do some visioning together about what can our community look like. We have, through this crisis, the opportunity to create something new, something better. And so how do we dismantle what we had before and rebuild something that really does serve all populations? And we know that it's important to continue to focus in some aspects on what we call the technical, which is we have to deliver food, we have to make sure that people are in housing, especially in a time of crisis. And how do we start working more adaptively, which is really pushing ourselves to find the answers to questions that we may not know the answers to right now. We haven't served all populations in the past, so how do we do that better? And so we're really starting to weave together what we call the technical and the adaptive. And our work in these calls is to come together, to learn together. We, the backbone, use many of the tools that we are working to share with you all to help be thinking more adaptively, and so that you can take these tools and utilize them back in your environments, in your neighborhoods, in your community, in your organizations. And part of the work that we'll be doing today is, of course, we want to continue to be ready to work together. Last week we asked you to think about specific areas of focus, and meaning, you know, food, housing, etc. And you self-selected into some of those areas. And so we're doing what's called a stakeholder analysis. And it's important for us to be more efficient about what we're doing and being more specific about what we're doing, and having the trust in ourselves that we're taking action in what we're saying we're doing, and the trust in others that they are also taking action. In order to really feel confident about that, we need to understand who's doing what, which is what a stakeholder analysis is. So we'll be providing that back to you based on what you provided last week. We'll also be doing some breakout rooms and having deeper conversations about the current state in those areas of focus. We'll be talking about action commitments. This will be a practice that we'll be doing on a regular basis. It is in those actions that we all take between these calls that will actually move us to the results that we're looking for. And we'll share a couple of tools about how we hold ourselves accountable to that. I also want to mention that those relationships obviously are very important. Making those connections one-on-one is important. We're going to leave this platform open for about 15 minutes at the end of this call to allow for people to connect. Think of it as the end of an in-person room when you see someone and you want to say hello and have that connection. Vicki will be on hand. If somebody wants to have kind of more one-on-one conversation, she'll be on hand to help you get into those breakout rooms. All right, building relationships is really important, and making sure that all voices are heard is really, really important in our work. And we do that through Gracious Space. This was up prior to the start of our call, so for those who are on a little early, you had a chance to see this. You also saw this in your homework, so to speak. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds just to review what we're calling a brave space, and then we'll get into our breakout question. Okay, hopefully you guys had a chance to review that very quickly. We're going to be going into small breakout rooms. By the power of Zoom, you do not need to log off and then log back in. By the power of Zoom, you'll be transported into a small breakout space. And I invite all of you to participate and share what is most important to you in a brave space and why. So there'll be 3 of you in each of the breakout rooms. Please allow for each person to share. You'll have about 5 minutes to do that, and then you'll be transported back into this main room. So Vicki, if we can have everybody go to their breakout sessions, and then we'll bring everybody back afterwards and invite folks to share one or two ahas that you had in those conversations. So have a good conversation. We'll see you in about 5 minutes. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good conversation. 5 minutes goes by really quickly. That's the one thing I've learned in these breakout rooms. So I'm going to invite folks to either in the chat offer that reflection of what you may have heard in that breakout discussion, or I want to invite folks to unmute and share just one or two folks who might be willing to share some ahas or some bits that came out from your conversation.
Yeah, this is Paul Lawley, Friends of Youth. I was with Judy from School District and Anu from Indian Association of Western Washington. And I think some of the things we talked about, just as far as the brave spaces, the people, and I think the new world we're in is really grace, having grace with the people that you're in with the space. Thank you.
It's great, Paul. Thank you for sharing. I loved your little icon you had up there too. All right, one more. Somebody else willing to share, or again, please feel free to offer it into the chat, which gets very active during these calls. Liz, I see you've raised a hand.
Yes, thank you, Paul, for modeling that. So in our space, we talked about trying to let go of perfection. And we also kind of recognize that many of the people on this call are women. And we thought in particular that we could do a little more leaning in and not talk around things and kind of call people on the truth in a kind and gentle way. But we all decided we need to let go of perfection in order to move forward.
I love it. Thank you, Liz.
Hey, Stephanie, sorry,
go
ahead. I would just love to add, since I heard Liz kind of speak to gender and naming that the roles that we hold in our professional lives, in our personal lives, as well as our identities and lived experience really do inform how brave you have to be, so to speak, the cost, the experience of being in these spaces. And I think for me, when I first saw this, that's what made it so powerful, was it acknowledged that doing this work isn't always brave space or always safe space. It does require you to be brave. And we touched upon that a little bit last week. I shared for myself that when we're looking at data that's asking me to intellectualize my lived experience, that's not necessarily a safe space, that's requiring a lot of emotional work for me. So it is about being brave. And then lastly, the thing that resonated really with me today was the line where it says, we have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. And I think that that is the heart of doing adaptive leadership work. So I'm really excited to continue to guide us in doing that today.
Thanks, Kalika. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think this is, it is in these spaces where we're taking these risks. What I like about the brave space is it is asset-based, in my view, which I think is so important in our work. And if we are not taking the risks and making ourselves more vulnerable, allowing ourselves to be more vulnerable, we won't get to those, as Kalika says, the rough edges where we start to really learn and be better. And this is about learning in public, so that space is really, really important. So I appreciate what all of you have been able to contribute to that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide as we start getting into the work. We're switching, getting right into it. So based on input from you guys, you all said that you wanted to have 3 particular skills that you wanted to focus on: community engagement, data practices, and adaptive leadership. And there were 5 areas of focus that you said you really wanted to focus on. And that's what you see listed here on this slide. For those who might be on the phone, I will list them. They are, and there's a number associated with each one of these areas. It's number 1 is food, number 2 is housing, number 3 is remote living and learning, number 4, funding in East King County, and number 5 is mental, social, and emotional well-being. These numbers will be repeated for the next few slides, so don't worry if you're on the phone and you missed them. We'll have opportunities to repeat that. You all, if you were on the call last week, contributed via the chat, which I see some folks doing right now. If you already contributed that, no need to recontribute at this time. We basically took that information that you provided, and we're going to be providing back to you that stakeholder analysis. For anybody who is new this week, I invite you to actually contribute now via chat in those areas which you believe that you may have the most impact through lived experiences personally or in your role. So again, it's 1 is food, 2 is housing, 3 remote learning and living, 4 funding in East King County, and 5 is mental, social, and emotional well-being. Again, if you're new, please add that into the chat. As we'll be doing some breakout sessions later on, as we start to look into our specific work and go deeper, one of the things that's really important in our work are action commitments. In order for us to take the right action commitments, we have to be mindful of kind of our boundary of authority, both informal and formal authority. And we also need to understand and make sure that, and have trust that others are taking action so that we're able to collectively move our work together. One of the tools we use to help us with that action is called the accountability pathway. Taking accountability for our actions can be hard. You know, life happens, things get in the way. We know life happens, we're experiencing that right now. And this particular tool is something that is developmental. That means that we're continuously getting better. And you'll see on the left-hand side of the tool, there is a portion that's called unaccountable. The idea is to be developmental and continuously learn to move to the right, to be more accountable. And so when we are using this tool, it's the opportunity for us to have self-reflection when we take action commitments. Are we in the unaccountable side? Meaning you're waiting and hoping that somebody else is gonna take it. You took it, but you're hoping somebody else might take it. Or you might think, I thought somebody else was gonna be taking that. So this is your tool that you will use to hold yourself accountable for that self-reflection. The next stage of that is to have a conversation, either with a friend or a peer or a boss, about, you know what, I'm having these challenges, and I want to have a discussion with you to give me some insights on ways that I can actually move to the right more. If it's a boss in particular, you may need to have the space. You may need to have assurance about your role so that you actually can take on those commitments. What we oftentimes see is that people take on abandoned tasks, and they may not necessarily have the authority to take on those tasks. And so having that conversation with the boss can either affirm, yes, you're taking on the right action commitments, or not. So it is a tool to help each of us be better to move further to the right. Yeah, go ahead.
Stephanie, I just wanted, something really resonated with me when you talked about abandoned tasks, and wanting to look through that racial equity lens, thinking about, you know, for folks who've worked with me before, often I might say, okay, I'm going to step out of neutral. And as the only person of color in the room, these are my contributions. So as your facilitator, it's actually not my task. I am picking up an abandoned task because there's a perspective missing in the room. And I just wanted to provide that as an example of me as in my role, observing what is the group composition, who's in the room, who's missing. And if I have some insights, I might say, hey, at this point in time, I'm just going to lift up the fact that this perspective is missing, but ultimately I'm not the right person to drive that work. So I just wanted to, that kind of came up for me thinking about that intersection between being the right person to drive something and racializing that context. So thank you for letting me jump in.
Thanks, Kalika. And thanks for modeling saying your name as you unmute. Okay, so just really quickly, kind of the next phase of using this accountability tool, I mentioned the first is having a self-reflection. The second is having a trusted conversation with a friend or perhaps a boss. And the third is actually utilizing that in a space like this, where we're holding each other accountable, where we're building trust with one another. So it's all about finding ways to make sure that these things happen. And when these things happen, that's when we're truly going to be moving to getting to results together. So this is just another tool that we want to offer up to hold ourselves accountable. Speaking of accountability, I want to move to the action commitments that we actually talked about at the end of the call last week. Everybody took the action commitments to gather data on the baseline in your specific topic area, and to gather data on the desired state of where that particular area is. So having conversations with people with whom you serve or that you're serving in your particular area of work. And so what I want to do, and this is going to be a practice that we're going to be doing regularly on these calls, is that I want to invite everybody to unmute as you can and share where you may have some input and updates on action items that action commitments that you took.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Tammy.
Hi. From last week, my action commitment was to try to work with, well, I was working with Helena Stevens, and we're trying to build a data spreadsheet of food resources in Bellevue and food sources in Bellevue, who's providing food. And I knew that I wasn't the best at being able to put together that spreadsheet. So I reached out actually to your group and happened to get Peyton involved. Thank you, Peyton, for helping with putting together that data. And so that was my action commitment, and we're moving ahead quickly with that. So I appreciate all the help.
That's awesome, Tammy. If you are so willing, I'd love to ask you where you might find yourself and what you just described on that accountability pathway.
I was thinking that I think probably I'm more of the accountable because I am asking right away for help and moving forward quickly. I'm not just dropping the ball on that. I'm keeping up with that as well. Oh, and I also want to shout out to Lindsay, because Lindsay has been helping us with this process as well. So just kind of continually checking and making sure that all the voices are in the room. And I just am taking the modeling of Eastside Pathways to move forward.
I love that. Thank you, Tammy. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
I think you absolutely are on that accountability side, and I might offer that I see you in that finding solutions section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I appreciate
Thanks.
that. Thanks for putting yourself out there and modeling that. For others, I want to invite you to continue to reflect on that, especially as we continue on the call. Be thinking about action commitments that maybe you took and you may or may not feel comfortable sharing in this forum yet. Hopefully one day you'll be comfortable sharing. I invite you to continue to share in the chat. But again, this is something that we're going to be doing on a regular basis so that as a collective, we can truly get to the community that we visualize.
I see Mandy has her hand raised.
Oh, thanks so much, Kalika. Mandy, take it away.
So I'm Mandy from Alliance of People with Disabilities, and one of my jobs is just to be a peer advocate peer advocate. Works really well. I'm actually leading a group called FemPower, which is all about female empowerment, and whether it's and I actually specify woman identified, because I know that it's a spectrum. So right now I only have one person that actually shows up every week. And so I'm acknowledging that there is maybe it's something about the way I'm leading the group or my own perspective that is keeping people away. So I want to take as much responsibility for my own self as for people not showing up for whatever reason. And I actually got some feedback to write up, what you may call it, my brain. Okay, well, a kind of a survey about what does female empowerment mean to you? What kinds of topics would you like to talk about? And how can you be most supported? So I guess I would just say that I'm acknowledging my reality and also trying to find solutions. And I was in a staff meeting and got some input from my coworkers. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
I would love to add on to that. Huge kudos. And I would love to offer like how you're empowering the people in your community to be a part of developing those solutions. Because I heard you say like, okay, there was something coming up for me. I took pause to gather that data, get that feedback from them so that they could help me design the solution. So you're doing great. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, really powerful. Thank you, Mandy. I think you just exemplified adaptive thinking as well, right? You recognize that there are people missing in this whole realm of the work that you're doing. And so great job. Thank you. Thanks to you and Tammy for modeling in that. Okay, at this point, I think I'm at the end of my timeline here. So I'm going to turn it over to Peyton, who's going to take us through our data portion. And again, I want to invite and remind folks to be reflecting on those particular areas of focus, jotting down notes that you might be, reflections that you might have. And lastly, if you haven't had the opportunity already, if you're new to the call and you haven't had the opportunity to contribute the specific area of which you'd like to focus, please do so in the chat. So for now, I'll turn it over to Peyton.
Sorry, one sec here. Just I want to remind folks that this action commitment to gather data on the baseline and the desired state is going to be used to inform our work later on in this call. So I just wanted to lift that up so that you're prepared when we move into breakout sessions a little bit later. Maybe just kind of start thinking, checking in with yourself around what you've been seeing and hearing, because we will need you to have that information, even if you weren't able to do it in between calls. So sorry to interrupt, but just want to make sure folks are preparing that thinking for our time later on the call.
Thank you for that, Kalika. Thank you, Stephanie. And happy Tuesday to folks. Thank you for logging in again today and kind of remaining present during this whole time. I just want to preface, if I go off video, it's because of my connection, but I will still be here talking. So you might lose my face for a second, but just wanted to do a quick overview of a little bit of what we want to talk about today. We're going to look back at the focus groups you identified last week as we do some stakeholder analysis on those areas of focus, highlighting, as you see here, the roles, kind of responsibility, roles, resources, and relationships. We're going to look at how we all move to action and what that takes. And then we're going to, as we transition from the data section, talk a little bit about performance measures and how that will influence the work that both we are doing collectively, but also that you will be doing in your focus area. So on the next slide, we have here, last week, we asked you to choose 1 of 5 focus areas. And I know some of you weren't on the call last week, so you're able to do that now and choose focus areas. So I want to, we wanted to hear each of you speak last week about what the focus populations were in that right-hand orange column, from your lived experience as well as staying within that area of focus. So we know that each of the 5 focus areas, food, housing, remote living and learning, funding, health and well-being, affect the universal population, which we define as all folks in East King County. And with your help, we were able to really dig down into specific focus populations that are experiencing hardships or uneven impacts, or populations that these systems are not reaching equitably. And I want to pause for a moment and allow you to really think about, in this past week, or just today in these past few minutes, or just looking at these past few seconds, are there any focus populations, that you see in your area of focus that are missing? Populations, individuals, areas that you still feel that there are gaps in what's listed here. And I encourage you to write that in the chat box so that we have that kind of for the record as we move forward. As we move into the breakout groups later, we want to make sure that we can, craft our solutions towards these focus populations. And if there are glaring omissions, we would ask that you let us know so that you can continue to work towards filling those gaps. Now, in addition to looking at any one that might be missing, I want us all to reflect a bit on Joe, could you go back one second? I want to reflect all on the racial equity lens, that little teaching tool on the side. As we move to the next slide, the one thing that I really want to highlight is down at the bottom, the adapt area, it really highlighting one of the areas of collective impact, of mutually reinforcing activities. And Stephanie mentioned this earlier in the call. We're going to see, where each of you self-selected last week. And it's really important, as you all are incredibly capable and, incredibly committed, and many of your capacities and commitments and desires really do touch on many of these areas of focus. But for these calls, for these 90 minutes, we're going to ask that you really, really put all that energy and that focus into your single area of focus. That other folks are going to be doing that same thing and surface the results and the action commitments, as we come back together as a group. So just make sure that we can, keep our focus within our specific area of focus and trust that the rest of the folks on the call will be doing the same. So we want to make sure that each of these areas of focus gets the full weight of all your capacities.
I think Tammy modeled and spoke to that really well. Tammy spoke and modeled that really well when she talked about gathering data on food and then reaching out to other folks to take mutually reinforcing action. So that example of reaching out to Peyton to tap into his expertise, this intellectual resource, so to speak, to drive those activities. It looks like Peyton might be lagging a little bit, so I'm going to continue to move us forward here. So as Peyton was mentioning, just recognizing that we will continue to have dialogue to generate ideas around some focus populations or target populations, so to speak, recognizing that one size does not fit all. So recognizing, for example, that developing food service programs is a great universal tactic, but realizing that there might be some other nuanced details. I know last week someone brought up being undocumented, and maybe that there's some fear or concerns around receiving those services, or perhaps if you don't have a vehicle or transportation is an issue, that might make it more challenging to access those free food resources. So as Stephanie mentioned, while we're doing the technical and driving those resources of what we currently have, we're constantly thinking about what are those growing edges, where can we make those refinements so that we can reach new or different populations. Welcome back, Peyton.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping in. I apologize. My internet is what it is. I thank you for all having grace with me during this trying time. So I was able to hear Kalika really speak to how we are sitting in these specific areas of influence. And I believe, Kalika, you spoke about roles and resources and relationships as well. That's awesome. Thank you.
I think you should start there. I didn't get into it, but that'd be a great place to start. Thanks, Peyton.
All right, excellent. So, one of the things that we want to remember is, as you look at your name and your organization here, think about roles, resources, and relationships as they relate to results. And what that means is really, when we look at roles, both formal and informal, your BART, your boundary of authority, role, and task, basically how are you able to affect the results in this work through your assigned roles or roles that you've just stepped into, roles that you've inherited, assigned, salaried, lived experience, or things that you embodied. How are you able to really step in to focus? And the resources obviously are going to be your lived experience, your knowledge, your social, your monetary capital that you can bring to areas in that container. So we all work well together. Obviously, we want to make sure that continues, so that you can drive results. Also, the relationship to be leveraged to folks that are outside of the container. So we'll ask this question in a second, but who else out, on this call can you think of to really continue to influence this work? And third, and probably very important, is your relationship to the work interest. What skin in the game do you have to make this, to bring these focus populations, to bring their experience up and make sure that they are equitably served in these areas of focus. So we're going to allow folks to make sure that you are in the right area. If you do want to change, this would be the time. I know that we had a time up there for new folks to choose, but if you do want to change because you feel that your role or resources or relationships are better served in a different area than you had picked prior, now would be the time. So I'm going to give folks a chance to pause. I'm going to pause and give folks a chance to set new areas if they would like. And we're going to move on to our next slide. So again, if you do want to change, we have the numbers right down here: food, housing, remote living and learning, funding, mental, social, emotional health and well-being. And like we were talking about before, one of the areas of this work is, where can you make the greatest contribution, and really who will you take with you, especially from outside of the container, to really drive those results within your area of focus. So take pause, you can unmute, fill in the chat, or just journal to yourself and reflect on who might you be able to take with you from outside of this container to drive this work, and kind of where, in this area of contribution, how can you take them with you to make the greatest results possible?
Thank you, Peyton. I would love to, I'm gonna ask my wonderful boss, Stephanie Charrington, to jump in here. I'm gonna tap her on the shoulder. I wanted to add that racial equity lens to this section here. Earlier when I spoke to, and I mentioned several times, speaking through your lived experience. So I identify as being mixed, and I have the privilege of speaking to all of those different cultural and racial and ethnic backgrounds. And quite often, I think a lot of times when we talk about being the right person, especially when we're talking about doing racial equity work, I would love to invite Stephanie to talk about the role of the ally, the white ally in that. So wanting to make sure folks in this space that identify as white or Caucasian, that you recognize you are the right person to do racial equity work, but just that there's a different approach to that. So I'd love to hear, I'm gonna peg Stephanie because I know she can jump in and speak to that.
Well, I'll do my best. Yeah, speaking personally as a white woman, I certainly am on my learning journey here, and I will be for the rest of my life, I'm sure. And I'm quite frankly sad that I didn't start this learning journey about racial equity much younger. And I have the opportunity actually with my kids, and have had the opportunity with them much younger, to have these conversations about race and the impact that the current systems that we have in place are having on all specific populations of color. It is my opportunity to speak up. When I see something, I work to say something. I'm not always perfect at it. I'm far from that. And I certainly trip up and, put my foot in my mouth. And I love it, actually, when others call me out on it, because that's an opportunity for me to learn as well. And I really work to not take it personally, but really work to remain open in that learning journey. I think it's important. And again, I'm learning, but where I think the most important thing is where we have the opportunity to say something is actually say it. Is, how are you actually looking at this particular area of work in these conversations? So
thank you.
That's what I'll add.
Thank you so much. I think that really brings that energy, that spirit of brave space that you started the meeting with. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because in my role as a facilitator, I've had wonderful friends and allies in spaces that once the heat kind of gets turned up as we start to racialize conversations, say, I don't know if this is the right space for me, or if I don't know if I'm the right person. And this idea of maybe passing your seat at the table to someone who shares that lived experience. But I just want to make sure that everybody on this call recognize that we all play critical roles regardless of our race, while we're also asking you to be thoughtful about speaking from your lived experience. So thank you for modeling that with me. Pass it back to Peyton.
All right. It's been a little touch and go, but I'm now on my phone, so we're going to make things work. So again, thank you for working through the kind of these effective questions. Thank you to both Stephanie and Kalika. So on our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about our old friend performance measurement. But before that, I just want to make sure that we can make sure that everyone has picked a single area of focus. I know that I saw a lot of folks who are really excited about many areas of focus, and I think that really exemplifies both the capacity and kind of the spirit of love and giving of this group. But make sure let's just focus on just one to move forward. And getting back to the performance measurement. So this that we see in front of us is an example of the grid that we've gone through before, looking at our 4 quadrants, starting from our bottom right, looking at our focused population results of better off, and then moving back into difference made and how well and how much. I wanted to show this because we, as the backbone, are making sure to fill this out at the collaborative level. So what are we doing? What is everyone on this call, all these faces that I'm seeing? This is the work that the backbone is holding ourselves to do. How well are we convening these calls, and what is the difference made, and ultimately how can we as a community be better off in this space? Now, again, what you're seeing here is a template. This is what the backbone is using. Additionally, we want to make sure that looking at each of these 4 quadrants, that within your focus area, that you all are able to populate these quadrants, starting at what the population result will be. And we'll work on that through our breakout groups. And then looking at, what are the differences made? How well are you working? How well are you working together? And what quantitative indicators of how much you're doing? So how much food's being served, or how many additional services are being offered around, mental health and physical health and things of that nature. So this that we're seeing right here is at the collaborative level, but once we dive a little bit deeper into these specific focus areas, you all will be filling out each of these quadrants to track action commitments and to create a pathway to see how the work is going and whether there needs to be some changes, and what that focus population result will be, and how you will continue to drive towards that focus population result. So this is a tool that both the backbone is using and that you all will be using in your focus areas. So because the backbone wants to continue to make sure that we have, data around how you all are doing at the collaborative level, basically every call we want to keep collecting data, and we want to make sure that we are, asking data. And the next slide that we have.
Before you move on, Peyton.
Yes.
Always love when you put these little hats on things, my little lenses to look through. Wanting to double down on what I'm hearing Peyton say, so that green, that bottom right quadrant, as you are generating ideas around who those focus populations are, that's where you'll start to populate those, right? Because again, if one size does not fit all, it's critical that we're setting goals and targets for our focus populations as well as the universal. So for people who work in the school districts, for example, you're probably constantly seeing data that says, on average, these are how our students are performing as it relates to 3rd grade reading levels. However, when we disaggregate that by race, we're finding that there's different spectrums and there's gaps all the way across the country. So this idea of really being open and honest and acknowledging the reality of where those different populations are as it relates to our universal goal. That difference made, those are those focus areas Peyton has been coaching us to opt into. So recognizing that collectively, when in the better off it says all the residents in East King County will have the supports and services they need. Those are the dashboard lights when we're talking about supports and services: food, housing, funding, right? So those are those big, that's how we're chunking it out. And then that top right that Peyton was talking about, the yellow, is if you're not showing up on these calls, we don't know if you're driving those results. Those are the early warning signs that we're gonna actually move the needle on the bottom left, that chunked out work. If you're coming, you're attending, you're participating, you're taking action commitments, you're completing those action commitments, we'll see the numbers in the bottom left change. So when Peyton was saying we're collecting these and we're giving them back, know that when we look at that, you should be seeing those numbers moving in those quadrants, and that's how we know we'll get to the bottom right. So I just wanted to kind of turn that into what is that going to look like on these calls, and really emphasize the importance of doing those differentiated strategies for our universal as well as our focus populations. Thank you for letting me jump in, Peyton.
No, thank you, Kalika. That's a really important clarification. And especially the last thing that you said about the universal versus the focus populations. And we're going to talk about that in the breakout sessions, but that's a really important thing to remember, because the focus populations are what you all have really highlighted for us to focus on. And like, as Kalika said, when we're looking at, numbers changing and looking at how we're working together, we, the backbone, really want to keep collecting data that you were providing around the work that you were doing. And one area that we feel is a focus population, we just did talk a little bit about the school year, are kind of youth, and specifically youth at this time in this graduation season when there's normally a lot of pomp and circumstance, youth that are experiencing that particular type of loss. And you likely know or have heard of young people experiencing that kind of loss around the lack of ceremony and or graduation. But one thing that we want to do is ask a question that we have asked before around youth and community engagement, specifically because we want to see how each of you are thinking about and actually committing to engaging youth in community, engaging youth in the strategies that may impact them. I think that it's a really important point for us and for you to continue to have the youth at the center of these discussions. So we want to, I'm going to give you, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to just fill out this single question, just so we have an idea of some longitudinal data, because like I said, we've asked this question before, and we want to see how the calls and these meetings and coming together have really changed our thoughts and can begin to change the actions as they relate to engaging youth. So I'm going to pause and allow folks to answer these questions. Answer this one question. This poll is related. Thank you, Gloria, for that question. This poll is really in general. How are you engaging youth overall? And like what does that practice look like?
I think Mandy modeled that really well earlier when she said, there was something coming up for me and I took a survey so I could get that feedback from them. This example that Peyton gave of graduation, are we just saying, oh, youth want a graduation party and this is what we're going to do? Are we stopping and saying, hey, do you want to have a graduation party? And if so, what might that look like? And then even going further into that on that community engagement to empower them to be a part of driving those solutions. So collaboration and empowerment.
Hey, Kalika, it's Stephanie. I would offer one other step to that. Collaboration, empowerment, and then really being willing to change your current practices or systems so that whatever they may come back with for offered solutions, that you really are willing to create that space for those changes to happen.
For folks that are feeling stuck, it's kind of just don't let perfect get in the way here. The idea is just to get a snapshot. As Peyton mentioned, we have asked this question before, so we're trying to track that growth, right? When we talked about earlier, wanting to be able to see those numbers move. And so if the number goes down, that's great, because that shows we're more conscious of the value for this. If the number is going up, that's great too, because that shows that we're able to find and design those opportunities for this. So there's absolutely no judgment. It's just about being able to diagnose the current state and really being able to use that number to inform how we drive this work moving forward. I'm seeing your comment there in the chat, Christy, and I would love for us to hold that and think about unpacking that a little bit. I know we're kind of crunched on time here. I appreciate the feedback, and I would love to explore, ask you to explore what might that look like, just out of curiosity. So I'm going to move this on. I'm not sure if we still have Peyton. Sounded like his connection was working a little bit better.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna take over here and move this, prepare us to do our breakout sessions. I know we've been hammering you to opt in. We are so thankful for all the rich work that all the folks do on this call. Again, it's this idea of being able, because of the forcing function of working virtually, if we were together physically, we'd ask you to have a seat at that table, but also recognizing that you can continue to connect offline, use email, set up phone calls with one another. But for the purpose of these calls, we are asking that you're a part of a focus group. So when Stephanie was talking about that accountability piece, recognizing that we need to be able to start to make rapid action commitments on these calls, and you need those relationships and shared understanding. So it's like meeting with an old friend, and you don't have to give them your whole backstory. They know who you are, you can jump right in. And that's the purpose of having those focus groups. For those of you who haven't worked with us before, we've adopted a model called equitable results, which essentially just helps us chunk out and sequence the activities that we do so that we can go to get to equitable results. On our call last week, we really started having those dialogues about the universal, all the people in East King County, and having you generate some ideas around focus populations. Who are we still not serving? Folks were bringing up a lot of dimensions of diversity, whether that was your immigration status, your gender, having pre-existing health conditions, your race, your age. So knowing all of those things play a critical role. I think we're going to move forward one slide here when you have a moment. Thank you. We also, Peyton guided us in a factor analysis, which is a practice that we use. You can get really nerdy with it, or you can just use it just to help chart some conversations. So just checking in with someone and saying, hey, how's it going? Today's okay. Well, why? Well, I haven't had breakfast yet and I didn't sleep very much, but the sun is shining. So those are two things that are driving my state of well-being today, up or down, and one that was driving it up. So it doesn't have to be so formal. What's really critical, again, I want to emphasize is that baseline, right? So if I had to say, my mood today is at 87%. It doesn't have to be an exact science. If you have those numbers, I see a couple people from our data council on the call, shout out to you. If you've got those hard numbers and you can say, here's the quantitative data behind this, here's the actual baseline, that was those action commitments we talked about, that's awesome. If you don't, we just want to come up with a generic number. For example, I'm going to be hosting the call of the breakout session on remote living and learning. I might say, well, I know both the school districts sent out surveys to make sure everybody had Wi-Fi. I know they're working out partnerships. I know that they've come onto these calls and said that they're confident that most, if not all, have all those resources. I don't work there. This isn't my bar. I'm making this up. But I'm going to go ahead and say like 80% of the students have Wi-Fi and computers. I'm totally making up. Judy might jump in and say, I actually have the quantitative. It's 99%. That's great. So don't let perfect get in the way here. The idea, really, the focus and emphasis on factor analysis A, it's iterative. B, it's just knowing we have a starting point and really using the multiple perspectives on this call to talk through what is driving the current state. Why would it be that some people still don't have those computers? We've had folks like Alma and Liliana speak to the fact that everything requires you to have Wi-Fi to get the emails to begin with. And then someone popped in and said, okay, we're going to send postcards. We're not going to wait and hope and wish. We're going to come up with a solution that isn't requiring digital resources or digital access. So there's just some examples of how we're walking and talking through this, and we're able to find solutions rapidly, but some are more complex. For things that are more complex, it's on the other end. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see that community engagement spectrum, right? Bottom left is that technical. We have a known solution. I just need you to know that if you come to the school this afternoon, you can get a computer and a hotspot. But if it's more challenging, we just can't figure it out. We know there's some people in our community we're not serving. We have to collaborate with them to better understand what's driving the current state and collaborate with them to come up with solutions. That's the other end, the adaptive side of the spectrum. And stretch goal, how do you work with them to empower them? The work that Alma does with NISO is a great example of not only collaborating with people to get information, but putting them in a position, sharing power with them to drive those solutions. I know a lot of folks who work with teens, that is such a huge trendy thing to say, not only we're going to give the decision-making power to the youth, but we're also going to encourage them to drive those solutions. Folks like Michelle Williams-Clark with the, and I know Tina Morales, they're doing great work in the community right now with teens, not only helping them talk about what's currently happening, but putting them in a position to take action. So before we move into those breakout sessions, I do want to have just a quick overview. Again, that slide, factor analysis. If you don't have the hard numbers, make them up. If someone does have it, please offer it. Talk about what's driving the current state up, what's driving the current state down, and know that the statement around what the baseline looks like is going to be very loose. This is an iterative process. So again, with me, with remote living and learning, it's just how many people do we think have what their basic needs and supports met so that they can do this remote living and learning. As we work through this, it'll become more refined. The next slide, please. Before we move in, I've talked about validation before, and I want to just check in with the group to make sure we have shared understanding of what validation means. So when we talk about doing some hypotheses during factor analysis, based upon what I've seen, my lived experience, the roles that I hold in the community, this is what I think is driving the current state. In order to do adaptive leadership work, in order to do racial equity work, in order to do community engagement, we have to take pause, go have dialogue with those who are impacted, those who are closest to the result, to validate that. So I just want to invite a couple people to share what validation means for them. And I'm going to give you a little tip. It does not mean for people to high five you and say, oh, you're absolutely right. So it's not that. So just wanting to invite a couple people to share, what does validation in this context mean for you? You can use a chat or you can unmute yourself. If you're on your phone, *6. What would it mean for those of you who go out and speak with people? What does validation mean for you?
Kalika, I'm not sure if I'm on board. Tammy, this is Tammy Liddell. I know that with the network, I want to bring in different voices to the network meetings, people who are experiencing food insecurity, or people who can speak on behalf of people who are have food insecurity. I'm hoping that I can continue to bring more people to the table, so to speak, to talk about how we're going to move forward. How are we going to solve this? What do you need in order to communicate where to get food, how to get food, because that's what my goal is.
Thank you. So I'm hearing going to those people and unpacking the how with them is a part of what validation looks like for you.
Yeah.
Does one more person want to share what validation means?
Well, I'm just gonna say a little something. Alma Gonzalez Renizo. And validation for me will be respect everybody's story, and honoring by empower the people to lead their own story.
Thank you. again, that brave space, right? It's this, when I said earlier around, we have a responsibility to question what we think we know. And recognizing that we can only really truly know from our lived experience, our unique perspective, and recognizing that there's not a universal truth in that. So I'm hearing from both Tammy and Alma, if I could summarize it, to this idea of literally going out and having that dialogue and then being prepared to truly listen, respect what you're hearing, and receive that as their truth. And it's not our place to question it, but a place to be curious. And then also be able to stand in a shared leadership stance, a shared power stance with those people and say, you may not get employed to work here. You may not have formal authority in my organization, but I'm going to link arms with you because you have the authority via your lived experience to help me really understand how to do this. And I want to do this with you. So that's weaving all those things together: adaptive leadership, racial equity, and community engagement, recognizing that that trinity is really how we're going to solve this in a way that's empowering. For Nell, who's on this call, said last week, that help should feel like love, not oppression. And I'm going to keep bringing that back because that resonates with me when I'm hearing Alma say, you have to respect it and put those people in a position of power so they can feel loved and empowered and not oppressed by our help. So thank you, all three of you women, for contributing that. Want to continue to invite the few men on these calls. I know Paul spoke a little bit earlier in Peyton, but we know that you're mighty but few on these calls. So I'm going to move us in our breakout sessions. You're going to have a facilitator, one of our backbone staff, there to help you. We'll be charting, doing factor analysis on the current state as it relates to the universal, all people in East King County, and your focus populations. While we're in that space, I want to encourage people to listen for, look for areas for you to take action. That could be just as small as Judy saying, hey, Kalika, don't be making up numbers because that's not great. Here are those actual numbers. And I know we do have them, but I'm just using that as a silly example. So listen and look for, make sure you're writing them down. Vicki is going to be moving us into our breakout sessions, and I will see you when we come back.
Hey, Kalika, two quick things. If anybody's on the phone, you'll probably stay in the main area, and Vicki will make sure you get into your breakout session. And then I also just want to lift up, we're going to invite folks to share after this. Hopefully it's not going to be one of the facilitators sharing. We'd like to invite others to do that. So be thinking about one element that's pushing the numbers up, one element that's pushing the numbers down, element being the factor, and then perhaps any action commitments that come from it. We want a very quick summary, 30 seconds or less. It's not a, hopefully not a big lift, and we want to invite folks to be thinking about that when we come back.
And just a reminder, we will be recording our breakout session. So I just want to name, as we're in that brave, safe space, that we are recording. I'll see you in just a moment.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sandy Nathan, and I'm excited to be deep diving into food with you all. I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so let me know when you can see my screen. The way that we're going to really do this today is we're going to be deep diving, like I said, and doing a factor analysis at universal population and then focus population. So the way to get started with the factor analysis for universal population would be, let's take about 20 seconds to look at our universal result. 100% of East King County residents have the support and services needed to survive through this dire time. And if we were to put a timeline to it, then let's say October 2020. I'd like you to reflect on this result and come up with a baseline here. So the baseline really, didn't want you to try to get it perfect, like don't let perfect come in the way of good, like Kalika says. Think about a person from the work that you're doing, and we can come back and refine this as we learn more. We're trying to come up with a baseline to say X% of people in East King County have accessibility to food resources by October 2020. So how about we take 20 seconds, think about a number or a person that makes sense to you, and then let's come to an agreement. Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to unmute and what are the numbers that are coming up? What could our baseline look like? We have 15 minutes to work through this, so I'd really like to invite folks to be bold, unmute, and share.
I'm Melissa Slater-Frick, and by October of 2020, I would sure hope it's 100% have access in some way to services related to food.
What are the others feeling? Do we all think that that's a baseline that we can work with?
Yes.
So I'm gonna input 100% here. So now that we have a baseline, the way that we are going to be doing factor analysis, and I know that you have done it before, so we're going to be talking about factors which are deltas that are driving this current state down. So which is going to impede 100% of people from having food accessibility. And then we're going to also talk about pluses. So factors that are driving the state up. What's working in favor of us achieving this goal? Like I said, please feel free to unmute and we can start either with the deltas or the pluses. Is there anybody that would like to get us rolling?
Sandy, I think that probably media coverage, which is currently in the works as far as media coverage of programs that feed people, and that's going to drive that baseline up, is when more people are aware of the percentage of people in East King County who are food insecure. I think that that's going to help.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Do you think already?
Actually, Sandy, can I clarify that?
Yes, please.
Media coverage sharing programs that meet the need. I not the real numbers, because I think that might be a hard fact, because I really feel as though that percentage right now in the current state is a lot lower than I think what most people think it is.
Tammy, I'd like to drill a little deeper. Do you think that there is already works happening as far as media coverage is concerned, or is that what we need to drive this up?
It's already happening, and also the gathering of data. I saw Helena jump on. I think that gathering this data and getting some numbers is going to help us move this work further.
And I guess I would add that along with being able to share with the community real numbers as to how folks are being fed, I'm hoping that we will reach isolated communities that have low levels of trust with institutions and agencies and that's where my fear is that where we may not have the truth of it as to how many people are actually going hungry, whether that's due to not knowing where resources are or not trusting where the resources are coming from. So I think that those are the things that we're going to have to demonstrate. We're going to have to prove to those communities that we are respectful and trustworthy and that we will follow through on our promises.
Thank you for that, Helena. So you're saying that so we don't have it in place now, but we need to work around it, right? We don't know the real numbers of who doesn't have the food resources. We still have marginalized sections who have low levels of trust. So are you looking at that as a delta at this point that we need to keep in mind? Because as we are working on the factor analysis, we are really looking at the current state. As of today, what you spoke to, is it sitting at a delta, or do you think we are working towards it so it's a plus?
Well, I think right now it's a delta. I think that some of the ways that we're addressing it that becomes a plus is one, sharing the numbers collectively as a community as to what we're seeing and what's being done, and then being able to ask those questions around who are we missing? Are you included in those numbers? Do you feel included in those numbers? So that people can say yes or no, and then we can begin to work on those relationships.
And can you add in, Sandy, if you're doing the typing, can you add in what Helena said, collectively as a community? Because I think that word collectively is really important.
Yes, and I echo that too. All of it. We have undocumented families that are afraid to come for help, or afraid to get help across the board, food, housing assistance, and that's a population that we're really concerned about, and making food access especially really easy. That we're communicating. Tammy talking about media coverage is another way to really reach broad populations, but how are we doing it? What's our communication like? And I know City of Bellevue, Helena, you've worked on flyers that are coming out in 7 different languages. That's hugely helpful. And how are we then also, it's that collective, right? Working together to get words out to lots of communities in multiple languages and multiple formats so that they know where to get food.
And so Melissa, my big question and concern is that, you know, the 7 languages, that's great, but there's probably at least, well, we know that over 100 are spoken in our school district. So who are we missing out there? Because 7 isn't a drop in the bucket, right? And so I have real concerns about that there's missed population, missed community.
And I would like to drill down on what both Melissa and you said, Helena, on how will we, so what are the factors that are not letting us find out who are we missing? So if we could think about what are the factors that are impeding meeting the 100%, is the fact that we don't know who we are missing. So as we move along in this factor analysis for focused population, I'd like you to hold that optics to think about strategies and ways in which we can make sure that we can reach the breadth of our audience. Is there anything else that's coming up for folks in factors that are impeding the universal population from getting food accessibility?
Yes, something came out in a meeting I was in yesterday that people are actually starting to make choices about, do they spend their gas money going to get food, or do they not spend their gas money to go get food? And then when I heard that, I thought, oh my goodness, we need to be cross-connecting in some other fashion. We've been focused on the food, but people have other needs that are impeding them getting access to food as well. So it's not only, so they may know about it, but they may say, well, we can't afford gas to do that, and we can't walk there, or whatever it is. So somehow I thought, okay, we've got to do a better job of cross-connecting, because people shouldn't have to make those kind of choices.
Sandy, in the deltas, can you also put fear?
Yes.
Because I think that that's a really important one, is fear. Just basically fear of being undocumented, fear of going out into public and possibly going against a stay-at-home order. You know, and do they know, do families know that they can go out? It's okay to go out, but yeah.
That's a great point. We also heard in a couple of our other breakout rooms about the misinformation in the community. There are just so many multiple channels that are being used that the community doesn't know what to trust. And so there's a lot of misinformation that's circulating. Is that something that you have come up, if you have heard from the audience that you're validating with or serving?
I haven't heard that specifically from school district families, but I did just want to add on to the fear and anxiety piece. We're also hearing families that are needing help for the very first time. And there is a lot around that where they just don't want anybody to know. They don't want the people in the front office at their child's school to know. And so it's trying to normalize the need for help and normalize receiving help. And as much as we can be doing too, it's just that new populations that we're serving now. And that's another, I think, challenge for us, is to figure out how are we getting the word out to everybody that needs it and helping them know how to navigate.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite the others in the group to also chime in before we move on to the focus population. Is there anything else that's coming up that maybe I didn't capture, or anything else that's coming up for you? Yes, Jen.
Sorry, Lindsay.
Of course, Jen, thanks.
So we've been talking a lot about one end of the spectrum, which is the recipient, people who, I mean, we all need to access food. But, you know, I think one factor that I'm thinking of that will become more and more of a problem is the other end of the spectrum, which is the provider of the food or the source of the food. As we know that, you know, whether it's farming or distribution, the entire system is being disrupted. And so if things are not being harvested or things are not being actually delivered to a place where we can all access it, those that are already marginalized will have even tougher time accessing food. So just thinking about the whole system, how can we preserve the core or the source of the food so that everyone and those targeted population could continue to have access to it?
Jen, thank you so much for lifting that up. I think it's really important that we think, as we are looking at our baseline, 100%, we need to look at the entire spectrum. Can you review what I captured, and maybe in the chat add in if I did a good, if you would like to fine tune that, because I want to make sure that I capture your voice. Before I move on to Lindsay, I know that Lindsay, you were stepping in to speak as well.
And Sandy, did we lose, is it, I saw someone else who was on this call that I was curious to know her thoughts. Was it?
Oh, did we lose Narima?
No, I don't think so. I think it was Josefina.
Oh,
I'm still here.
Oh, you are very good.
Yeah,
I was wondering about your thoughts.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest one that I can relate to the population I serve is fear and anxiety. Is it safe to go outside? Do we have the materials to go outside? For example, face masks, hand sanitizer. And then, of course, the undocumented population is really a population I can relate to. And I can see those fears in our adults.
All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Do you see a Word doc with
Yes.
universal population at the top?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Got
So our goal, right, is to do some factor analysis around housing in East King County. We've got our focus population, or our universal population, which would be everybody in East King County. The focus population, based on what we've heard previously, is undocumented families, families needing rental assistance, and multiple individuals or families living in a single location. So what we're going to do is come up with each of these, what the current state is as far as how many residents we think are adequately housed in the universal, and then the focus population and what's driving those figures up or down. And then here at the back is action commitments that I will capture as our discussion goes forth. But this is really your meeting, not mine. So I'm just here to facilitate. So as far as our universal population, anybody have any guesses, ideas, data around what percent of the total population in East King County has adequate housing right now?
An Alex question.
Yeah. I know. Well, I was trying to think because we do our, the city of Bellevue does our biennial needs assessment, and I can only say that in the city of Bellevue, there's over 30% of the population is, let's see, what the correct term is, over 30% of the population of Bellevue is paying more than 30% of their income in housing. And that is a red flag, or a kind of a bad thing that is making it hard for people to, this was before COVID-19.
Right.
This was data we got actually through our demographer, through census data. So it was, you know, it's fairly accurate. So what we're understanding, and no one has the answer to right now, is that in the last few months, because people have lost their jobs, that number is likely to go up.
Right.
And we, you know, it's just common sense that it will. And we actually had about 20% of people in the city of Bellevue who were paying 50% or 50% or more of their incomes for rent, so for housing.
Yeah.
So that's going to go up too. So I can just say that is, you know, I don't know when those numbers will be officially updated.
Sure.
But it is the people are at risk of homelessness when their numbers go up like that, and it's, so
and the
that's,
thing,
yeah.
I was going to say, with factor analysis, right, is we continually, it's not like once we write it down, it's written in stone, we'll continuously adjust all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, why don't we work backward? What do we think as far as the focus population? You know, have housing or adequate housing, or are, you know, housing insecure? And that focus population, again, undocumented families needing rental assistance, and multiple individuals. Am I recording that? Okay,
Yeah.
multiple individuals.
Joe, on those targeted populations, I know when you say multiple individuals, could you just give me a sense of what multiple individuals mean?
I think it probably means, I mean, I don't think we dug into it. It was kind of self-defined by the group. To me, that means just non-family members, right? Roommates, or, you know,
So
whether by choice or not.
Actually, the multiple families or individuals living in a household is usually where you have 2 or 3 families in one household.
Okay.
So that's usually, you know, you have somebody who has the lease, but individuals or families who also live there might not be on the lease.
So would we need to actually start getting into the actual factors? So what do you think? Would 50%? Is that high, low? What gut feeling? We're going to go on gut feeling until we have data.
I was going with 20%.
20%?
Of the entire population, as far
No,
as...
just the affected population, right?
Oh, like how many undocumented families? Is that what you're saying?
No, how many of these groups are there that are facing, that are in a housing crisis?
Well, I think Alex just gave some really good numbers regarding how many folks in Bellevue are paying more than 30% of
So do we
rent.
want to say 50% for this population for now?
I'm with 50.
50?
Or more.
Let's just put it down. We can always adjust, and maybe that's an action item that we need to go find that out. Baseline for the total population. 70%? Right. The challenge with East King County is the cloak of wealth, as they say, where the perception is that.
Yeah, and also what you're defining as East King County, how far are we going? So yeah, 70%.
Well, I live in North Bend, so as far as I'm concerned, out to me, because I know there's a big problem out here. So
70 is fine to start.
All right. All right. So let's say of the universal population, what is it that is keeping the entire population? What's causing that? Some factors. Just popcorn it out. There's no right or wrong.
Money. So there's always money. So affordability of housing, basically that.
Yeah, high rent.
High rent, or high rent, and then also there's not enough supply of affordable housing. Supply of housing.
Supply of affordable
housing.
Housing.
Population growth.
Hmm?
Population growth.
Oh, that's a good one. We can come back to this. and these, see, this is the fun part. Pluses, what is keeping that from being lower or higher? You know what I'm saying?
Policy.
I'm sorry, what, could you explain that? What is keeping the problems from being higher?
Yeah, what is keeping,
okay.
What's propping it up?
What's propping it up?
Or what is
well, here, let me throw out an example. I would say, right, that there's Microsoft, right, as a big employer, right? So, other large employers.
Yep. Okay.
I'll go figure this out later. I'll go. What else?
I'd say access to social services or friend social services.
And sometimes I think, as far as I'm concerned, is like when you do these types of analysis, something can be a plus and a minus, depending on what it is. What about?
I was going to say transportation.
Transportation.
Because transportation access is sometimes causes people to live far away. Lack of good transportation. They live far away from their jobs. So, it pushes them out into areas with lower rents, but then they have higher expenses trying to get into work.
Right. Okay.
I would say welcoming community. Just
How about supportive, or would you want welcoming?
I'd say welcoming.
Welcoming. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's quickly, because we can always go back and fill this in. How about for these particular focus populations, what is it that is affecting this negatively? Right, what's affecting their ability to have affordable housing or secure housing?
Supply.
Huh?
Supply of housing. Just supply.
Supply of affordable housing.
Low wages.
Low wages. What about? I'm gonna leading questions. What about, like, especially if you're undocumented, right? Fear of immigration. Would that be a factor or no?
Well, I don't know if it's fear of immigration or just the different restrictions that you have when you're applying to affordable housing, or just applying to housing, such as credit, such as
services. When applying for services. Excellent. Yeah, you guys are the experts. I'm just your typist. So, anything else?
I think some of the other factors, and I don't know, you already mentioned it below, but the kind of the high skilled workers that are moving into cities, making it so that the landlords and management does, gouge
Underpaid workers driving up rents, costs. How about things keeping it from being worse? That's how I'm defining pluses.
Advocacy, so we do that all the time.
More money in, I mean, it's not enough, as we know, but, you know, slight increases in money for affordable housing. Construction.
What else? Community, connections, family, support.
Well, yeah, well, what families who are multiple families living in one household, what they're doing is this, they're just making it work, right? So they're finding creative ways in which they can survive even though they're not making a lot of money.
I would put in there, but it's still part of advocacy, but legislation, whatever, wherever it comes from.
Policy.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's go review where we were. Make that smaller. So, driving the state, lack of cash, high rent, limited supply of affordable housing, population growth.
Hayden!
Hey, Corey.
Hey! Oh man, I missed your face.
You too. It's been some months. It's been some months.
It's been a hot minute, that's for sure.
Anu, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Hopefully my internet has recovered because it was not great today. Let me make sure I'm actually showing the correct screen. I don't think I am. Hold on one second. Okay. So hopefully you should be seeing, make this a little bit larger, our factor analysis. It seems like I thought it was going to be more folks.
I think we're getting some people from phones coming in.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about just going through factor analysis, both at the universal population and the focus population around health and wellness. And we want to expand that. I know on one of the sheets, or one of the slides, it did say just mental, emotional, and social, but I think that obviously physical is part of that as well. So I want to make sure to expand that. So again, we don't quite necessarily have the numbers, and we can work to get them, but in the absence of some of those numbers around the universal population of East King County, like ideally we have our result statement here. We want 100% of all East King County residents to have the health and wellness supports and services needed to survive through this time. Or we have October 2020 there, and I think that's optimistic, but through this time, through this specific kind of challenge that we're going through. And I want to just throw out, what are some of the factors that are driving it up in this, or driving it down. And our current state is the percent or number, and we can just use that. The number of residents in East King County with the proper health and wellness supports and services needed to survive, like what is driving that number down? Whatever that number might be, what do we think is driving it down? And this is, Kalika likes to always say, this is throw things at the wall and see what sticks. The next step is obviously going through the validation, but I really want us to think about what, in our experience and our lived experience through what we've heard, what is driving these numbers down. I can model and I can start. I know that one of the things that I've heard is just a lack of multilingual services. Multilingual service options. From a lot of the folks in the community speaking to, yeah, that has been a factor driving down the amount of supports that folks have, because if they're not able to access them due to this specific barrier, that is not helpful. So yeah, I'm just going to stop there, and we're only going to spend 2 minutes here because I want to move also to our focus populations. So again, this is just all of East King County before we dive into the specific focus populations. And you can do deltas or pluses, whatever we want.
I would say that, oh goodness. So one of the deltas that's driving it down for me personally is that I feel like there isn't good instruction on how to do exercises and things like that would be that would help me when I'm working like 14-hour days. But there's I think there's really a lack of exercise instruction and stress management in general.
Lack of quality instructional exercises for stress management.
One thing I would say, I don't know if it falls in this, but seniors, the ones who are not on the internet or who don't even have an email, it's very hard for them to apply for anything or learn about the resources. I mean, community organizations like IIWW for Our Community does a really good job, but during this time, it's hard to get the information unless they join the WhatsApp group or anything like that. But even, if you're applying for any government resources, unless you go through the community organization, you have to have an email, you have to have all that to create an account and do those things. I think that's the challenging part for older adults who never got used to the technical things or don't even have an internet in their home.
Right. That's good. And I know one thing I also wanted to highlight that I heard here, and check me if I'm wrong, is one of the pluses driving it up is the work of community organizations to kind of bridge that gap. Because you said without them, those folks. So I will say that community organizations bridging that access gap. That is a completely different font. That's fine. And I can't spell. But you know what I'm trying to say. Wow. Bridging. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think that's helpful. I do think that this is, again, the overall focus, the overall universal population. I want to move us down because there were 3 focus populations that were identified at this point last week. One being individuals receiving telemedicine services. Second being those fearing kind of racist targeting due to this COVID-19 pandemic and folks' reaction to it. And the third being individuals fearing domestic abuse, domestic violence, and or child abuse. And those were specific focus populations that we brought up last week as populations that we want to make sure have the appropriate supports that the system may not be fully formed around or may fall through the gaps. So I'll pose the same questions for those populations. What might the specific deltas driving those factors down, or the pluses driving those, driving that current state up? And again, we're talking about the availability of kind of health and mental wellness resources for folks receiving telemedicine, fearing racist targeting, and folks fearing domestic violence or child abuse. What might be helping drive up the amount of services that they receive or drive down the amount of services that they receive?
Are you open to adding another focus population?
Love to.
The one that I know we are hearing a lot about are people that are generally low income who are having to give up their jobs. If they aren't losing their jobs, they're giving up their jobs because they can't get childcare. And so we're finding a lot of people who are terrified that if they cannot find childcare, that that their already tenuous hold on their finances is going to just go away.
Mm. So essentially having to choose between working and
taking care of your kids. We have a couple people who have been through our homeless program who are on their feet and are about to lose that.
So then what might be, again, some areas of, these are this is heavy stuff. These are really, you know, I know heavily impacted focused populations. How do we feel that these are currently? What factors are driving it down, driving their ability to receive the services down, and what factors are driving their ability to receive these services up?
I would say that we interact with focused population 2, 3, and 4 all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, one of the things we're seeing with this is that there's a lack of understanding among them for understanding the importance of childcare. That's a big one. And then I think another one for us is around child abuse is a big fear for us too. Like we know that the statistics are saying that it's much higher now, that everybody is in a place, but there's not a lot of support around how to protect your children from abuse in these situations when they're locked up, basically with their abuser.
Mm. Thank you. I know that. Okay. Melissa, sorry, I did not see you there before. But I want to make sure that we think about, again, for any of these 4 focus populations, what are the deltas and also some of the pluses, I think that went down here, that are allowing these focus populations to receive services. You know, what's driving that current state up? What do we feel is helping them receive services, or again, driving it down? I just want to make sure that we have a couple on both.
I had to join late, but I do kind of have like an idea. And again, this is Melissa from the city of Kirkland.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, I don't work heavily in this field, but I would say, just out of my own perception, that as a Delta driving services down, or just in general having a negative impact, would be unemployment. Like if and unemployment would affect people as far as maybe unemployment combined with either isolation or, I guess, being in lockdown could feel mental health distress or addiction habits, and having that around, in addition to, you know, if you do have a family or someone in that family is having that issue, I feel like that's even more difficult to, I guess, to diagnose or to reach out for help on, especially if there's no real outlet to to ask for help, unless you know where to find it. But I think that is a big factor.
Helpful. So and just to clarify, one thing that I really heard there that I thought was important was the it seems like the lack of an outlet unless you know where to find it, and if you weren't necessarily tapped into those services or supports before, it's very difficult to try and find them now because there's so many other factors that are, you know, kind of competing for your attention, time, and like additional stressors. So I think that's actually a really, really important point. Yeah. Do we have any pluses? And we don't have to, but are there any pluses?
I have one plus.
Okay.
I have one plus. So
okay.
we have a small group of people that do family services for people who are not English is not their first language. Those meetings have moved online. They used to be in person, but they've moved online. Okay. And people are still coming.
And this is Miss Sika, and I'm over on the phone, so you can't see my face. But yes, a quick plus is that faith-based organizations across multiple denominations are partnering together to help with the mental well-being and the social-emotional, safety and security of thousands of people across the East Side. I personally even received a visit, knock on my door from one of them, and I serve on a team that makes weekly phone calls, checking in with families. So I just wanted to highlight the faith-based organizations and how they have been partnering to really help with that piece, to help people stay connected and keep data points from previous conversations, to follow families and know specifically what's going on in their households, and to support them through either just listening or prayer, whatever it is that they would like, or however they like to be supported. So I just wanted to highlight that plus, that is ongoing and growing.
Oh, thank you. That's really, really helpful. I'm happy that we were able to tap into that.
All right. Hi, everyone. Glad to have you here with me. I'm getting my screen up so that I can chart for you all. Please let me know when you can see it. Awesome. So we have a pretty small group here, so feel free to unmute yourself. I just want to remind you, if you are with me, that we're focused on remote living and learning. Yeah, we're good. And if not, you can leave the room and Vicki can put you where you would like to be. So just want to quickly, because I do see some new faces in this conversation, want to hear from a couple of folks. What does remote living and learning mean to you? As a team, we just put that together based upon what we saw, but just want to make sure we're all on the same page around what the heck remote living and learning is.
Being able to access what we need using technology.
Okay, thank you. Gloria?
That's what I was thinking. So, yep.
Same thing. I agree.
Wow, looks like we're ready to rock then. Fernell or Reggie, do you have any additions there? Good, okay. I think one thing that I'll add is I've started to see a trend of like emotional support. So not just like the technical piece, but like the human piece around living. Some people in my house are extreme introverts and they're loving it. And then some of us are extroverts and we're like, this is whack. So there's that piece, just like the mental health aspect as well. That's what comes up for me in addition when I think about this time.
Yeah, so can I speak to that too? So both Melissa and I posted about the event we have tomorrow, but that's a huge piece, mental health piece, but also how do I not beat up my sibling? I mean, in all fairness, right? They're driving each other crazy. And how do I establish my own space when I'm living with all these other people?
Yeah, so how do I still stay connected in the world without anyone getting sick?
So I'm starting to hear us do that factor analysis. So if you can see my screen, I'm going to start putting that in there. I'm hearing that isolation is driving this down, but it also could be driving it up. depending on your personality or your emotional needs. When Reggie, you started talking about creating your own space, am I hearing that as the need to create your own space? Would you say that's driving it up or driving it down, the current state for everyone in this community?
What, can you explain more what you mean driving up or down?
Yeah, so if
Like-
I'd say like, I'm gonna make this up, or would someone like to offer a number, like how many people you think have their basic needs and supports met? Like when we talked about like the emotional piece and then the technology piece to live during this time of remote living, like, is there a number? Like, do we think 50% of the community? And then this idea of like, if 50% of them, why is it 50%? Well, for a large group of people, isolation is driving their capacity to thrive during this time down. And then there's other people it's actually driving it up. Those might be two different focus populations. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say, for example, isolation for an extrovert is driving this down. Isolation for an introvert might be driving it up. And so being able to have my own space while I'm in confinement.
I think that's going up. The more time we spend together, the more time you realize you want your own space.
And I would say for the introvert, it's the other way. The more time that we have our own space, the more even the introvert misses that time together. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm an introverted extrovert, so I extrovert for my job. And being a teacher is kind of like that, and then even in the position I am now. But it can be exhausting for me by the time I get to the end of the day. But I know being with people in space, like physically, does make a difference for my health, like my well-being, even though it makes me really tired.
I think to add to that, actually, I had a discussion, I'm in school too, so I had a discussion with my classmates about, we spend all of our time at home, so all of our different lives are at home, so there's no definite lines between everything. Things sort of blur together, so you don't go to work, and you don't go to the gym, and you don't go home and have dinner. Everything sort of blends together. Your roles and responsibilities just become this big, huge blob. And that's a huge energy zapper. At least for me it is. I mean, I find some days when I have class and work, I'm on Zoom for, 7-8 hours a day, and it's just exhausting.
I would put another word in there, which is lack of structure. Definitely with what I do, a hard one is just because it's all remote, there's this sense that you can do it anytime you want. However, nothing has changed as far as people needing some structure, boundaries to what they're doing and when they're doing it.
And I would add that it's hard to know when to stop your actual working job, because you can access it 24/7. So at what point do you say, oh, if I just get this one more thing done, then I'm caught up for tomorrow? And at what point do you say, I've got to have a mental break from this and spend family time? And that's another odd thing to me, is that we're in the house and we're still trying to set aside time to spend as a family, where you would think we're tripping all over each other, but it has to be structured for us in order for it to happen.
There's a lot of multitasking going on. I mean, I'll be working and doing laundry at the same time, right? I mean, that's something that you wouldn't normally be doing.
Is that driving the current state up or down, multitasking?
I'd say up.
Okay. I would like to add, no commute is driving it up for me.
Oh yeah. From my bedroom to my little home office, less than a minute.
Yeah. I think we're resonating a lot of like the social emotional, but we did start this conversation talking about the digital divide, those who have and those who do not have. So I'd love to hear some factors that are universally impacting our community as it relates to that digital divide.
The access to Wi-Fi, because some have better Wi-Fi than others, although my population, we've just got it to where everybody has Wi-Fi. And yeah, bandwidth, that's a great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And also how, you know, how up to date the computer they're using is. If they don't have a computer, you know, trying to do stuff on their cell phone.
I think another piece of that too is not knowing how to fix things. I mean, they're getting tech support at school that they're not getting. You know, if nobody in their house understands anything about computers, like in my household, then you're kind of stuck.
And the education around using the computer, the programs, turning in homework, even if they do have it, all the different ways that teachers are asking to engage with them and turn in homework and use this tool, use Seesaw, use Zoom, use all those tools. Even we've talked about this in the Zoom, being able to block your background or your home or your face, or because it's a home visit. And so, you know, talking with my staff about, you don't have permission to do that 3 times a day, you know, let alone one. You've made it clear that, you know, families aren't welcome here outside of grades, or I did something wrong. And then now you want to be in my home all day. That's just the violations of that, or how it feels, and expectations around the technology.
You had me all kind of in my feelings when we were talking about all the platforms. I have 3 kids, and I have 14 teachers between all 3 of my children. And my high schooler, Gloria, cover your ears. Actually, don't cover your ears. Give this feedback. My elementary student, it is phenomenal. It's easy. My middle school and my high school, it is horrific, because the elementary school teacher, this idea of teachers working in isolation. My elementary, it was one teacher, everything's in OneNote. There's a tab for each elective, and then the week, and then all the links, all the assignments, all the tutorials, and the talking points. My high school student, they emailed it, they didn't email it. It's on OneNote, it's on SharePoint, it's on specific. I mean, it's like they probably have, my son, my eldest in high school, probably has 20 or 30 different sites just to get through his day. It's absolutely impossible. And the communication is in isolation. So I get an email, he gets an email, but we both don't get an email. And for anybody who's had a teenager or has a teenager, that's not going to work. Right? Like, they didn't tell me. Well, here's the email. Well, they didn't tell me. I don't need it. I'm like, oh my God, just quit. I don't care. So like, that's how I feel.
It is more seamless, for sure.
Overwhelming. I can't even keep track of when I got the initial email from each teacher, especially the ones that are like, I'll email it. It's on OneNote. Okay, well, this teacher's on. It's there. It's too much to ask of me. I can't imagine asking that of a developing child brain. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad you did say last night we had a district equity team meeting, and we did it for a shorter amount of time, thinking about like people's physical bandwidth. So we did it for an hour, and I invited Dr. Holman in to talk to us about moving forward with our equity policy. But one of the things that came up as he was joining us, and then at the end, we had some parents in the group, and they said the same thing, that there were so many platforms and things to interact with that people have stuff in different places. And so Dr. Holman talked about this balance of that teachers have like this the freedom to do that, but at the same time, it's a lot. And so I'm going to connect with the group for the remote learning for the secondary to talk about that, because it's a lot. And it's the same thing with my kids. They go to Issaqua School District. We live in Sammamish, and it's overwhelming. And especially, did you get an email? The same thing. No, I didn't get the email. I'm like, but I saw the email, and then I'm sending it to my husband because he doesn't get all of them, and we're trying to balance it. So it is frustrating.
And if
Can
you
I
have
add something on that? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, one other thing that I think is that every teacher can use one system or the other. So it's frustrating for the kids because one teacher uses like Teams and the other one uses OneNote. So yes, I think somebody says structure. Structure can also come on this because if all the teachers will need to use the same platforms and the same things and maybe just have them all in one place, it will make it a lot easier for kids and parents to work on this. And that has been a big complaint in my community, that first, they are not very savvy on this, and second, they have way many platforms to go, and each teacher can do like the way that they think is better, but that at the same time is causing confusion on the kids.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would throw in there, if we have the time, that we have a high school student who for the first time in his life has 3 general education classes. So we are really having to navigate him through all of these systems. And, you know, when my 30-year-old graduated from high school, this was just coming online. And the next 2 kids, I was like, oh, thank God you know how to access this, because this is way too much for me to figure out. But now we're back to, we have to guide this work. We can't keep up with who wants what where, and the due dates are changing, and it is so difficult.
Plus, take into account kids' learning styles. Nobody's even talked about that.
Exactly. So Gloria, let me know if you need backup.
We're all with you, it sounds like.
It's interesting that I'm going to use this information as part in my district, the information from last night, because when kids are not getting their needs met, the autonomy has to also, kids have to come before so much autonomy.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, parents have so much, their role is so much more than it used to have to be. And they're dependent on, you know, an 8-year-old describing what and where they need some.
Man, we got cut off right in the middle of some rich contributions. I feel like I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding.
We did as well. For a second, I thought I had lost connection.
Oh, wow. Well, I know I didn't get an opportunity. I just want to invite my co-facilitators, if you could let me know in the chat box who from your group will be providing a summary. And I'm going to ask Gloria from my group, because she'd already mentioned taking this data back to her area of focus, her organization. Before I invite folks to share just 1 or 2 talking points or key takeaways, I want to really lift up something that I heard someone say in my breakout session when Gloria said, I'm going to take this work back. And then someone else said, if you need someone to go with you, I will. I want to acknowledge, how can you leverage the data that you just got, the stories that were just told, take them back and share them with other people to drive this work? B, who can you do that with? Who can you take with you? Peyton talked about that. So it's not only the people on these calls, but the people outside of these calls that we want you to encourage about who do you take with you, right? Those small steps, linking arms, that's those mutually reinforcing activities that are ultimately going to drive change in our community. So thank you. I'm seeing we've got some folks up here and ready. Let's see, who is going to, I saw Gloria say that she was willing to speak on behalf of our group. So while I get everybody else organized, Gloria, do you mind just sharing 1 or 2 talking points from our breakout?
Sure. A couple of things that came up was around relationships in our households, and with this new remote learning and trying to balance that. And one of the things that I wanted to spotlight around relationships is that it's harder to make relationships in a digital way. So we have students that did not have their relationship with staff in schools. That really highlights the need for that work to be done even more intentionally. So if this does happen to us again, that students aren't made to feel burdened to have a relationship when that may not have been at the forefront of that staff person's mind. And another thing that came up was around platforms, that it's a lot of work for families to support their children with so many platforms. And the idea came up that Lake Washington is one of the districts where there is a lot of autonomy, and some of it's contractual with where teachers place information, whether it's in OneNote or Teams and all those different folders, that really does take a toll on the family, and it doesn't acknowledge kids learning in different ways and that intensity that it does impact families around. And so I thought about that. I'm going to take that information back because it really does intersect with the district equity team meeting that I had last night, and that that there's a such thing as autonomy, but there's also putting kids first, and how do we balance that when kids are at the center and not necessarily making something really confounding for our families. Thanks.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you so much. You're getting some round of applause here. So I'm going to invite Josefina to speak to food.
Okay, hi everyone. For us, our biggest takeaways was in regards to validation, to making sure we're seeing all the populations that we are trying to serve, which, you know, could be reaching out to marginalized sections, folks who may not trust the folks who are giving the food. We also discuss about communication styles, stepping away from online communications like emails and going into postcards and other ways too. In addition, also moving away from just serving the popular languages and trying to reach out in more languages, as we know in our communities that we do serve. I think that's a really good one or two.
Thank you. I'm hearing a combination of some known solutions that were lifted up as bright spots, things that were working well, and then also this call to action to, and that's where when I said, can you at least as an action commitment take this and share it with someone else, because language become popular because people talk about them, right? Oh, did you translate that into Spanish? Every time someone says that, you're helping fuel the fact and popularize that. So I really love that call to action, because that's a simple action commitment to take back and say, I was on this call and someone reminded me that there are other languages besides Spanish in our community that we might want to translate into. I'm going to invite Liz from funding.
Hi. Well, we really wrestled with trying to come up with a number or percentage, and we had some anxiety about what we came up with, which was we felt that perhaps only about 40% of needs in East King County are currently being funded. We also acknowledge that human services in general are woefully underfunded pre-COVID, probably even more so. We talked a lot about some of the factors that drive that number down. Part of it is a scarcity of resources, or thinking there's a scarcity of resources, and a lot goes to areas of greatest need like South County. We talked about some of the factors that can help drive it up, advocacy by coalitions like this one and others. We also talked about a false belief of churches and others being able to do the work and that government has a responsibility. I don't know that we came up with an action commitment, but I felt we had a good conversation about how to try to quantify need.
Thank you for that. I really want to emphasize some things that I heard. One was that the responsibility to question what we think we know. And then I also started to hear you talk about the mental models, the stories that we tell ourselves about organizations and people, right? When we've talked about racializing lived experience or individual community members, we also recognize that organizations and entities also have personas, also have things that we believe to be true about them. And so just calling us to action to constantly be questioning what we think we know, not only about people, but also organizations and the roles that they can play in the community. And I've heard throughout these calls people speaking to the fact that, hey, this is what we're really good at, but quickly being able to shift those services. I think the school districts modeled that early on in the call, that food was a part of what they offered to help ensure that students were able to learn and stay focused during school, but then they quickly ramped up to providing that service at a different scale than they had before, as well as constantly modifying and refining that process as they were learning more. I'm going to ask Corey to share on behalf of the Wellbeing Group.
Hi, thank you. Yes, the Health and Wellbeing Group. We looked at some of the deltas that were driving this down and determined that lack of multilingual service options is a big issue. There's also quite a lack of quality instruction on exercises for stress management. So for people who are might have trouble getting out or working a lot in this time, or not working, and how to manage that stress. And then really a lack of access for people with learning and resources for individuals and populations without internet access or email addresses. And I know that our organization also does an awful lot with data literacy. And so if we're thinking about the things that are driving that up, though, the pluses, the community organizations are really bridging an access gap. So we feel like there is some amount of collaboration between a lot of organizations and in some cases the government too, to really drive up a lot of that infrastructure that people really need it. And I would say we also did add another focus population to our group, which was low-income individuals and families having to give up work and income in order to provide for childcare. That seems to be something that is rising to the top for us a lot lately. And if we're looking specifically in East King County, the lack of understanding of the importance of childcare among among employers specifically, and then how to protect children when they are in situations where they're locked in with their abuser. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then we also have another driver in the East King County, which is unemployment combined with isolation, fueling mental health distress and/or addictive habits, and no true outlet to ask people for help unless you know where to find it.
Corey, we're over on time, so I appreciate it. If you don't know, Corey's a part of our data council, so you can see she's really good at her job. You can't have her. Thank you. I do want to make sure, because we are over time, someone from Joe's work on housing, just 1 or 2 talking points, and then I'm going to close this out.
Come on, Team Housing. Oh, don't leave me hanging.
Who'd you have, Joe? Call him out.
I don't know. Is there anybody whose name begins with a Y?
Oh. Well, that's a really unique letter.
All right. Well, one of the things that we came up with that was the lack of access to services or problems getting to services. One of the things that was supporting was the idea of community support and some public policy. But for data-wise, it's a matter of really getting some good handles on those numbers. But we didn't really get a chance to assign that to anybody yet. So people may be getting emails.
Thank you. I think I just heard a voice there.
Yeah, this is Alex. One thing we talked about was, just the lack of affordable housing that existed pre-COVID, because we had some data on how many people are paying more than 30% of housing before the coronavirus. But now we're, with everyone with high unemployment rates, we are thinking that's going to be even more of a serious issue. So that is kind of, and it is even more exacerbated for our kind of our defined populations. So.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Joe. Thank you for that. Thank you all for these additional moments. I just want to remind folks that if you have the time and you want to use this Zoom call, the platform, to use private chat, I'll also be staying on, as well as Sandy and Vicky, if you would like to have us move you into a small breakout room. Joe, if you don't mind moving slides. I want to remind folks that these tools, the framework, our PowerPoints, the notes, all of these things will be available. On the Google Drive, so you'll have access to them later on. I did hear people, I want to really acknowledge, I remember in college I had a communications teacher that started the class by saying, I'm not going to teach you anything. And I'm like, well, I just paid a lot for that. And then he said, I'm just going to teach you how to talk about it. And so I want to acknowledge the fact that while we're sharing a lot of jargon and tools, that really we're just helping name the critical, amazing work that all of you are already doing. Each time someone says, this is what I'm doing, when I'm jumping in and saying, hey, so what I'm hearing is on the community engagement spectrum that you're empowering people. You're all doing really great work. We're just developing shared language and shared understanding of what we're doing so that we can do it intentionally and we can continue to improve that. So please do access the Google Drive. It's available to you 24 hours a day. Not saying you should work that many hours a day for those of us who are in my group, but know that these tools are always available to you. We thank you for the work that you're doing. Continue to take those small action steps. I hope that this call was helpful for you. We will be taking the work that you did today and bringing it back to you next week to continue to work on and share out. So thank you all. If you'd like to stay, feel free to do so. If not, I will see you next Tuesday.